Hello and welcome back. In today's video we're going to talk about one of the most important adjustment tools in Photoshop, which is the curves adjustment layer. This is actually one of my favorite tools, and today is going to be a quick introduction. If you want to learn it more in depth, make sure to follow my course. It's going to be in the link below the video in the description. So without further ado, let's just start. And a curves adjustment layer is just a adjustment layer like all of the others. And what it does is basically controls the lightness or the brightness values of your image. And for example, on the right side we have the bright values, and on the left side we're gonna find the dark values. If we select this point right here on the top and drag it down, it's gonna make the image darker. The more you drag it up, the more the image is brighter, you can see. And if we leave it like this, for example, and add another curves adjustment layer, if we select this dark value and drag it up, you can see that we're making the image brighter once again. This is just a quick intro, so don't worry if you don't grasp the concepts right away. And just like any adjustment layer, or any layer for that matter in Photoshop, you can use selection tools. For example, let's use a lasso tool and let's make a random selection like this one. If we select the curves adjustment layer, you can see that we made a layer mask. And now if we made this area darker, you can see that only this area is affected and not the rest of the image. If we, for example, right click, then delete the layer mask, the whole image is going to become darker. So keep this in mind. So you could make selections, maybe some areas in your image that you want to make darker without affecting the rest of the image. This is how to do it. You could use the lasso tool, you could use a polygonal lasso tool, maybe some other selection tools like the quick selection, the magic wand, or maybe the rectangle or the elliptical marquee tool, and of course the pen tool. Let's not forget about that one. So how this works basically is, let's use the curves adjustment layer once again. You can see that we have two values, the input and the output. If we select, for example, this point, the input is 186 and the output is the same. If we drag it down, you can see that we're changing the output. All right, and this is the input value and this is the output value. So you could do this automatically. If we select a point right here, you could, for example, make it 155 or maybe 100 or 180. Okay, so you could change the output, so keep this in mind. And now that we basically grasped a basic concept, we could move on to an example. And for that I have a quick example. This is just a guy in an arcade, and let's say we wanted to place this other man. Let's fix this spelling mistake. If we wanted to make him look like he belonged to the image, let's start by pressing Ctrl U to load up the hue saturation and desaturate this image. Now let's use the curves adjustment layer. As you can see, we have the brightness values are not matching between the two characters and the rest of the image. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna load the curves adjustment layer. So let's suppose we want to make this guy darker in general. If we just press this point and drag it down, you can see that we're making the whole image darker, and we don't want to do that. So what we're gonna do instead is we're gonna press Alt and click in the line between the man and the curves, just like this. Or let's press Ctrl Z. You could simply press this icon, and there you go. Now we don't want to actually make the whole image darker. So what we're gonna do is we could select, for example, the let's see, the darker values. If we want to make them darker as well, let's press this point and drag it a little bit to the right. You can see that we made the darker values even darker to match with this guy right here. As you can see, the shadows are too dark, unlike our guy in here. You can see that the shadows are a little bit grayish. We want to make them dark. And let's click this layer again. Now let's look at the before and after, and it's already looking so much better. And the highlights as well, they're not that light or that bright on this example, but on our case right here it's too bright. So we could bring this down a little bit as well, and you can see that it's already looking much better. Let's leave it somewhere like this. And another thing is the midtones or the mid values. As you can see, we have some grays in here around the jacket, some blacks that are not actually bright like this. So we could select a point in here in the middle, try to drag it down. Alright, and you can see that it's already looking much better. Now it's not gonna look perfect since the light sources are not matching. This is just a quick example to explain the values. So let's press Ctrl Z and let me show you an easier way to do this if you don't want to go to the tedious process. You could simply press this icon, and what this does is allows you to select an area. For example, this is a bright area. You can look at the point in here. You can see if we press in here and drag it down, we're going to make that area darker, and if we drag it up, it's going to make it brighter. And for example, in here you can see that this is a dark value, unlike this one. So you get the point. Let's select this shadow. Let's make it darker. It's already looking much better, but let's just make this area a little bit brighter, not too much. And of course we could make this one a little bit darker, and you get the gist. Let's look at the before and after. And now you need to know that the good thing about the curves adjustment layer is it doesn't only allow us to adjust the brightness and contrast of an image, it also allows us to control the colors. And for that, let's move on to the next example. This is just a character from Pac-Man, and let's say we want to place it in here in front of this arcade or this neon light. What we're gonna do is, like the previous example, we're gonna load up our curves adjustment layer and clip it to the character. And let's see. Alright, this image is a little bit darker, unlike our character. So what we're gonna do is, let's just try to make it a little bit darker like this as well. And let's add a little bit of contrast by making the rest of the character a little bit dark as well. Now the good thing about having a layer mask is that we could select an eraser or a brush, and let's actually make it smaller a little bit and choose a black color. And let's go with 26 or 25 on the opacity. You could do it using the flow. I just prefer working with the opacity. And we're gonna try to leave some highlights on the top, since we don't want to make the whole character darker, since we have a light on the back. Right, so now we could do the same thing on the same adjustment layer, but I prefer to do it separately, so I'm gonna use another curves adjustment layer. Let's clip it. And if you know, in the RGB spectrum, the opposite of blue is yellow. If we select the blue, for example, if we select this point, which means this is a bright area, it's gonna be in here, for example, on the top, since the rest of the image is darker. If we drag it up, you can see that we made it even bluer. Let's do it with the whole image so that you could see. If we drag the shadows up, you can see that we made the shadows bluer. And of course, if we do the opposite, what's gonna happen is we're gonna make it yellow. You can see, now we made the highlights yellow. Let's do it using the whole image. And a little bit like this. Let's make the shadows unaffected by this. Let's look at the before and the after. And we could invert the selection just like this and using a soft round brush. Let's start painting some of the yellow highlights on the sides and on the top. Okay, so let's look at the before, and this is the after. You can see that it's really easy to create beautiful images using just the curves adjustment layer, and if you master it, you're not gonna need any other adjustment layer for that matter. So to finish it up, I'm gonna give you a final example where we're gonna use a lot of the techniques that we just talked about. So what we have here is an old video game system, and let's say we wanted to place this Super Nintendo or this SNES and replace it. So what I did is I just simply created the same background. I cut out the cartridges, I placed them in here, and I added some of the original shadow. You can see if we disable the layer mask that this is just the old image. It's desaturated and turned into the multiply blending option. Let's leave it like this for now. I placed my Super Nintendo and I just added some cables. If you want to know how to do this, of course, you could follow the course. You're gonna find the link in the description below the video. Once again, I need to remind you. Alright, so let's take our Super Nintendo and let's make it match the rest of the image using the curves adjustment layer. Let's clip it, and what you're gonna notice the first time is that actually this Super Nintendo is a little bit brighter than the rest of the image. So let's just try to fix this by selecting this point, and let's make it a little bit darker, not too much. Maybe a little bit of the midtones as well. Let's see. Look at the before and after. Alright, I prefer it this way. And let's try to make this area a little bit brighter, since you can see that we have shadows in here and in here on the left and the bottom. So that must mean that maybe light is coming from here, from this side. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to make this area a little bit brighter, not too much, since there's not that much contrast with the lightness and darkness. Okay, so I like it this way. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to match the color. Let's add another curves adjustment layer and let's clip it. Now if you notice, the whites on now if you notice, the cartridges have a little bit of a yellowish tone, or an orangey tone. It's mostly a yellow tone, so let's add a little bit of that yellow tone. You can already see the difference. This is just a small adjustment and the difference is huge, as you can see. And now what we could do is we could add the shadow. Let's not forget about that one. And let's see, let's add our adjustment layer. Let's go below the Super Nintendo and add the curves adjustment layer. Let's add a little bit of darkness, a little bit darker, maybe something like this. And of course, this is a simple layer. Like all the layers in Photoshop, you could control the opacity if you think that is too much. But for now, let's invert it by clicking on the layer mask and pressing Ctrl and I. Okay, so now what we could do is we could start drawing our shadow. You can see that the shadows are on the left side and on the bottom. But since this is a 3D object and it's really higher than the cartridges, we must have some shadows all around the Super Nintendo. Just a little bit like this at first. Then we could start drawing similar shadows to the cartridges. I prefer to do this manually. Of course, you could do it using your preferred method. This is my preferred one. I like to do things manually, since I believe this is the best method, and if you follow my course, you're gonna find that this is really useful. It's gonna make your results much more realistic and much better, in my opinion at least. And if you take a look at my artworks, this is the way I do it, and I really believe that this is the superior method. And you could of course use an eraser and try to soften up this shadow, or the edge of the shadow. Let's look at the before. Looked flat, and now we have a shadow. Alright, so we could press Ctrl and click on the Super Nintendo. Let's add a new layer. Let's use the curves adjustment layer since we are already using that. A little bit like this. You're not gonna notice any difference since the layer is still below the Super Nintendo. Let's drag it a little bit to the left and a little bit to the bottom. And what we could do is we could click on this layer mask, and now we have density and feather. I'm gonna explain this in upcoming videos, the difference between density and feather and how to work with layer masks. But for now, let's just increase the feather. Not too much, since we don't want to make this too blurry. And let's adjust the fill. Okay, this is looking much better. Look at the before. Actually, this is an empty layer, so let's just delete it. Let's look at the before and after. Once again, before and after. I really like this one. And as a final step, and since I really like to add details, let's zoom in. And you can notice that this orange background or this orange floor is making some areas on the cartridges orange as well, since light is bouncing and hitting some areas, some corners on the cartridge. It's gonna change colors, and for that, let's add a new curves adjustment layer. This, we could add some reds, a little bit like this, and if you want to make orange, then of course it's red plus yellow. So let's add a little bit of yellow. Actually, let's do it the opposite way, like this. Let's look at the before and after. All right. Now let's double click, and we're gonna remove it a little bit like this. Look at this area right here, just a tiny bit, to create the illusion of light bouncing from the floor and hitting the Super Nintendo. Now let's invert the selection, and we actually don't want it in here, since the background in here is beige or yellowish, I don't know how to call it, unlike this area. So we only want to have some orange on this side. So let's try to paint it manually, just a little bit like this. For the untrained eye, this is not gonna make a lot of difference, but for you guys, it's gonna make your artworks much better. So let's group all of these layers and call this SNES or Super Nintendo. And as a final step, what we could do is we could add a curve adjustment layer in here. Let's make the whole thing darker, like this. To make this look more realistic, what we're gonna do is we're gonna choose an eraser, and we're gonna start painting back some of the brightness, a little bit like this. Now let's look at the before and after. You can see that we made all of this using just the curves adjustment layer. Of course, in my artworks, I'm gonna use a lot of simpler techniques like painting with the brush without using adjustment layers in some cases. In some cases, you're gonna need the curves, and the levels adjustment layer. These two are my favorite. So if you wanna learn how to create artworks in my way and the way I do them, make sure to, once again, go to the description below the video, and you're gonna find the link to my course. I really couldn't recommend it enough. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to press like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon to receive notifications about the upcoming videos.